Lemon Amiga presents a Playguide video review. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hey there, welcome to another Lemon Amiga Playguide and review. In this episode we'll be taking a look at Typhoon Thompson in Search for the Sea Child. Developed by Dan Gorlin Productions and released by Broderbund and DeMark in 1989. Distant future, a spacecraft crash lands on the planet Aguar, and the only survivor is an infant. Unfortunately, the infant is being protected by sea sprites and they won't give him back, and they will jump into their own aircraft known as flyers to try and defend themselves. Those kinds of flyers are bumpers, enforcers, and things which will vacuum up our craft. And it's great to see these in the introduction sequence. We'll have to watch out for those as the game goes on. But to help us in this game we have two friendly spirits, and by taking 4 items to those friendly spirits, the sword, the hammer, the balloon and the soother, we need to rescue the baby. And all we need to do is blast those guys out of their homes and collect those, and that's level over. If we leave the credits, that will also reveal a demo sequence. So let's go ahead and press that left mouse button and begin the game itself. As we play this game, we can press escape at any point and that will bring up an extra menu. And in this game there are 4 major weapons. By pressing the F2 key we can check out how to fire those. By pressing the space bar there we can access the 4th weapon. We control this game with the mouse, so there is an option to swap the buttons over, and we can even toggle mono and stereo sound effects. By pressing the left mouse button we can fire our weedy missiles at those guys, and by holding down the right mouse button we can fire our retro booster, which will jet thrust us towards those guys. And as you can see, the mouse control is pretty agile. We can move forwards and backwards very smoothly and quickly. The aim of each level is to blow up or try to extract from those sprite islands the sprites, and they will jet out of there in their craft, blow up that craft, and then the sprites will eject, and all we have to do is run over that sprite to collect it. And you have to collect that thing before it swims back, otherwise it will acquire another vessel and you'll have to shoot that all over again. Luckily we can bag those guys pretty quickly by running over those, and we can shoot those guys while they're in the water, and that means we can collect those. But you have to make sure you don't press the fire button too many times, because that will blow those sprites further away, and sometimes we can be collecting those things forever miles away from our target. And so in this case I'm choosing to pull back and return to our target, because there is no point chasing after these sprites whilst they are miles away. And the aim of the game is obviously to blow away all the sprites from all these islands and collect all those, and once all the sprites are bagged, then we get the weapon. Using the mouse control is very sensitive, and sometimes it helps to wander around our target and move that very quickly over our target rather than trying to bag that guy by hovering directly over, as you shall see a little later on. But apart from those hit detection bugs, which I am not entirely happy about, this game plays absolutely great, because sometimes you don't have to be bang on target to collect the critter, and that's a great feature. Sometimes you can drive miles away seemingly and still bag the object. Those enemy aircraft you can see buzzing around can affect our ship. Those yellow ones will bump us out of the way, and you can see 3D antics there. We can even drive over the islands and bounce around. The island in the centre will only become activated when all the animals are in the bag, and so let's collect the last one, hop over this island, and that's it. And then if we return to a red beacon, which you can see flashing around the centre, that will activate an animation sequence. And that's our first item collected. That's the sword. That means we can return back to our friendly spirits, distribute the sword, and hopefully they will give us another assignment. And that's the first object that we need out of the 4. We are also given a bonus life that puts us up to 2 miraculous lives, and taking a look at the control panel you can see we have 2 lives and all 3 of our jet sleds still remaining, and those guys will award 1 extra life, exactly 1 as soon as you complete that level, but they won't award any more jet sleds, so let's make sure we don't trash those. Next to those in the centre you will find a white cross denoting the central hub, and next to that there is the number of enemies that we've actually bagged on that level, and there can be any number of enemies as we shall see, because each one of these ships which blows up contains 1 enemy at this point, but there can be up to 3 enemies per ship later on, and if you don't collect all of those and even 1 back to the home, then a new ship will spawn with enemies contained within it. So at this stage it's important to collect all those enemies up, but it isn't as hard as it becomes later on. It's also possible to keep those guys at bay infinitely and stop those from returning home, and we can always return home at any point and blast those guys out and force those flyers to fly around. We can have any number of guys floating in the water and any number of flyers flying around, and you notice that those orbs, when we blow those up, we are avoiding those like the plague because they will destroy a life. Hopefully at this stage you can see by taking our time and triggering the enemies 1 at a time and making sure that we collect those up, then it shouldn't be too hard to continue. But if we let one of those flyers get in our way, sometimes they will destroy a chance, and in this particular case the enemy has vacuumed away our jet sled, which means we have to swim all the way back to the friendly ghosts, and then we'll hopefully distribute another jet sled so we can get on with it. In general, the gameplay is very fairly, and if we wander into those enemies, well obviously that's our fault. It isn't very easy to lose jet sleds and to lose lives, and we can progress by keeping those guys at somewhat of a distance, but if we don't watch out you can see, well, a hail there, a forest of globes If we get covered in those, well, that will suck us up and that will force a life over. That means now our jet sled will have to find its way back to the friendly ghosts, and now we will miraculously reappear. And the friendly ghosts will only be bothered to do that a number of times before they get bored, so they are sending us out again. And it's great in this game that we can alter our altitude and fly around. We don't have to attack these head on like I'm doing at the moment. You can see we can veer around and fly around these things, although it is quite disorientating to do that. But if we see a red light flashing over the island, we know there's something within it, and so red lights are the only things to anticipate in this game and collect up those enemies. And unlike most games, those enemies won't fight back once you destroy their ships, and it's a very easy collection point as long as you get that angle of attack correct. At this point on the second level, I'll just point out that the day is actually turning slowly to night, and we start off in broad daylight on the first level. On the second level we are at dusk, and then twilight, and then hopefully the last two levels will be partially dark and dark. And we have virtually an afternoon to rescue this kid, and all we have to do to get there is to bag up a few guys. So after that, let's collect our prize. Now we have a hammer, and you may wonder why we need a hammer and we cannot use that from our craft. Well, that will be used to break the baby out of jail at the end of the game. Unfortunately, we are not going to reach that point. We're going to reach level 4, and we are just about to enter level 3 out of the 5 at the moment. By holding down the right mouse button and pressing the left, apparently we get these sprite magnets, and I'm not quite sure what they do. And again, you can see me firing those off for no apparent use, and it's a shame at this point that we have 4 types of weaponry, and those are pretty useless apart from the main guns. And you can see ducking under the water there, we can make use of that and avoid the enemies. Unfortunately, again, we cannot shoot the enemies from under the water, and we have to be pretty brave and slick to pull off an underwater maneuver if we are being attacked. Trying to collect those enemies now on this 3rd level is not very easy because we are being bombarded, and in the thick of the action it's easy to get stuck. Back we go, down to 1 life and 2 jet sleds remaining. Well, it does give the player a break if we stand back from the action and pick off those guys slowly, but if we wait in all guns blazing and trigger off all these islands, of course we'll get hordes of guys attacking all at once. In this case, we can simply attack 1 island and concentrate on 1 or 2 sets of flying creatures, and if we blow both of those away, hopefully that will stop one of those emerging from those islands. And it's important at this stage to collect both, and if we let 1 return, well, that will trigger another one of those flyers, which is commanded by 2. So if you only collect 1 of those rodents, those pesky critters, that means that we'll have to destroy another flyer which contains 2, which means we have basically wasted our time. but if we can survive, you can see this game turns into an action fest pretty quickly, and we can make this as easy or as complicated on ourselves as we like. At this stage, it's a good idea to collect 3 or more sprites in one go, and that just makes the whole job of clearing these levels much easier. You can see, although the graphics in this game are pretty minimal, we get a sea surround landscape, and the sky doesn't really change much, and obviously there are no boats and things like that. Although the intro animation is absolutely great, and this game is absolutely chock full of atmosphere, and look at that, this game is way ahead of its time. Typhoon Thompson in the search for the Sea Child, apart from being one of the longest names in the Amiga back catalogue, was originally developed on the Atari ST, and it was then converted to the Amiga. It is based itself on an old Apple II game released by Broderbund in 1986 called Airheart. The game was designed by Dan Gorlin, and anybody who's wondering where they heard Dan Gorlin's name before, that's because he designed Choplifter, which was converted to almost every machine under the sun in 1982. And he made a fortune from Choplifter, and this was basically his second game. He didn't go on to much else after this, unfortunately, and he was the main designer and the main coder. He was aided by Christopher Shard, Patrick McCarthy, and Dane Bigham. And Dane Bigham went on to the quite rare Contraption Zack, a puzzle game in 1992, which has great graphics but is very rare. The graphics of this game were created by David Bunney, and David Bunney also created graphics for the 2 Savage Frontier games which made it to the Amiga, which were SSI RPGs. And this is certainly not an RPG, although it is a role-playing game. As you can see, we take command of Typhoon Thompson. We have 1 life remaining. If we get killed, then we'll have 0 lives remaining. Perhaps just like that. Luckily, we do have that life in the bank, and that allows us to complete this level. At least let's get through the 3rd level out of the 5 in this game, and the game is not very hard, it's just making it look quite hard in this playthrough. The object is obviously to stay at a distance and don't get suckered into the main action, and then you won't get trapped. I must say the range of sound effects on offer more than makes up for the fact that we don't have any music in the game, and we don't have any idea who created the title music either. But the sound effects are great, whoever coded those did a great job, and again it creates a great soundscape because everything seems to have its own sound effects, even bumping into things and blowing things up. As soon as those sprites hit the water, we'll hear a sound effect as well as a splash, and we'll also splash in and out of the water ourselves. But perhaps the weakest sound effect comes from our main laser weapon, which sounds like a pea shooter, and that is one of the weakest sound effects in the game, as is the weapon itself. Some kind of double fire or consistent laser beam would have been more effective than this bubblegum firing machine that we have at the moment. But it is effective at shooting those guys out of their infernal machines, so hopefully it won't be long before we clean these up. or maybe not. Now we are down to 0 lives in the bank and only 1 more jet sled remaining. So let's see if we can take care of those last few enemies on this level. And you can see we can fly around and we can actually maneuver ourselves and attack from any angle. As I say, it can become disorientating to do that. Although remember, we still have the plus on the bottom dashboard there. The plus will always give us a readout of which way we should go. And I like to attack these levels in one frame and one direction. And that certainly helps consistency. You can see at some points now that we're on this tough level, sometimes they spawn and pop out of their homes. As soon as you blast one, that will trigger the rest like a burglar alarm, and so you'll have to cope with those. And as I say, try to get at least 2 all together. And I think on the final level there is 3 per craft, and that means collection of those is pretty much more difficult. But look at this, if you can collect 4 or 5 in one go, then that's great. But as soon as they duck into the water, that means they cannot be collected, and you'll have to blast those all over again. As you may be able to tell, I have a very soft spot for this game. I don't really play it too often, but when I do, I have a great time with it. The mouse control is very smooth and very accurate. If you have a modern mouse like me with 4 DPI settings adjustable at the touch of a button, and you can always use Windows options and things like that to tighten up the mouse control, and WinUAE has its own mouse adaptation control as well. But if you have a low DPI mouse, it's probably better than a high DPI mouse, because obviously with a higher DPI mouse like mine, you can see I'm struggling to line those guys up. The Amiga Ball mouse originally wasn't very good, but the game anticipates that and caters for that. So if you can cater for that by lowering your DPI settings, you'll probably find this game slightly easier. So let's continue to use our jet sled very carefully and very slowly in this game, because we don't want to overreact. That will just send us way off target. And collecting these last few critters is very easy, and I love the way that we can bump off those islands and use our jet sled like Star Wars, bumping around there and skimming the surface. That is a great effect, and we don't see too many jet sleds in a computer game. I feel this game is an undiscovered gem, and the fact that it was released in 1989 proves that for an 80s game it was really trying to push those boundaries. And you can see there we can fly around in full 3D and attack the level at any angle, and that's absolutely great. I'm sure I am not consuming this game to its most full ability, having not acquired a great ability to fly this thing around. But you can fly around and you can do amazing maneuvers, and I really do love those neat touches in this game. Again, the animation and the presentation screens really add a lot, but again, the pixel perfect nature of collecting those enemies, sometimes you have to sweep over those, and it's much easier than trying to line those up spot for spot right over their heads. Returning to the panel at the bottom of the screen, you can see we now have collected 64 enemies, but unfortunately, having gone through this now for 15 minutes, we have used up our final jet sled. Bring us the balloon! Well, we shall try to bring you the balloon, and before we do that, let's just dip into the water and have a great time flying this craft. You can see there we are really making the most of this level now. We only have 3 islands, and those 3 islands only contain a number of ships, maybe another 2 or 3 ships to blow up, and that's the end of this level. this is actually the balloon level. You can see the balloon on the instrument panel, and we will also be able to see the hammer, the sword and the soother when they appear. And the balloon level, let's at least get off this and go onto the soother level, and then I'm showing you the 4 out of the 5 levels in this game. I have to say, without a time limit, this game definitely rewards the player that can take their time, and even at this stage we feel that the level is almost over. We still feel like we must take our time because there are still a surprising number of enemies still floating around. Just when we think we've cleared the lot, we'll find more, and so it's best just to take a deep breath and carry on going, blowing those aliens up out of their ships before those ships do any damage. And of course they won't damage us while in the water, so we can simply keep gunning those guys and jetting away through the landscape. And once again, jetting our way around that landscape never gets boring, and we can make up our own fun just by playing around with this and flying around, and by trying out these different weapons, seeing what they do. But even though those effects are great, I don't think those weapons do a great deal. I think the weapon which I was trying to launch there was a distance weapon which holds those enemies at bay, and there is also a freeze weapon as well, as we shall see on level 4, and well, those don't really have a great effect. Like that, once again, impossible to collect those enemies by being pixel perfect, so let's just sweep through the enemy and look at that collection first time. So it would be easy to criticise this game for being repetitive, and there are no moving clouds in the sky and things like that. But I think the neat touches of this game make this game very appealing, not only to the novice but also to the seasoned Amiga gamer as well. So let's collect our last few aliens, our last few guys on this level, and I can't help believing that those guys look a lot like Flat Eric, and those from the 1990s will probably remember that. And here we go, this is the balloon. And let's return our hard-fought prize back to those spirits, and even guiding that home isn't actually a doddle. Bring us the pacifier, also known as the soother, also known as the baby's dummy. And you can see that on the instrument panel whilst we play this game. Taking a look at the scores, Amiga Action and Amiga Computing gave this 72%, Amiga User International gave it 78%, Lemon Amiga, the One and Amiga Format all gave this 80%, Ace gave it 82%, Powerplay gave it 83%, Steel Amiga gave this game 86%, and Zap gave Typhoon Thompson 88%. That gives this game an average score of 8 out of 10, and even on the high score table there you can see the level that we reached, the number of islands that we had to clear, in this case all of them, the number of enemies we bagged, and our total time. I hope to see you again for another play guide and review.